My name is Rebecca, and I'm 29 years old. 6 months ago, I thought I had the perfect marriage with my husband David. I was wrong about everything, and now I'm sitting here trying to figure out how I managed to lose the most devoted man I'd ever known to another woman who does something I refused to do for 8 years: show him that she actually wants him. Look, I need to be honest about something that's going to sound completely insane to most of you. I genuinely believed that initiating intimacy was a man's job. Not just sex, but all of it. The flirting, the romantic gestures, the physical affection, even just showing desire. I thought that was what men were supposed to do, and women were supposed to receive it gracefully. I know how that sounds now, but back then it made perfect sense to me. Growing up, every movie I watched, every romance novel I read, every piece of advice I got from my mother and grandmother reinforced this idea. The man pursues, the woman is pursued. The man shows desire, the woman allows herself to be desired. Men are the hunters, women are the prize. That's just how relationships work, right? So when David and I got together, I naturally fell into that role. David was incredible at pursuing me. He'd plan surprise dates, bring me flowers just because, send me sweet texts throughout the day, and make me feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. He'd initiate every kiss, every hug, every intimate moment between us, and I loved it. I felt cherished and adored and special. What more could a woman want than a man who clearly couldn't get enough of her? But here's where I went completely wrong. I never once stopped to think about how one-sided that dynamic was. I never considered that maybe David might want to feel desired too. I just assumed that men naturally enjoyed being the pursuers, and that my job was to be grateful for all the attention he gave me. For 8 years of marriage, I never initiated intimacy. Not once. I never sent him flirty texts during the day. I never surprised him with romantic gestures. I never made the first move in the bedroom. I never even told him directly that I found him attractive or that I wanted him. I thought my presence, my acceptance of his advances, was enough. I thought that was all he needed from me. When David would reach for me, I'd respond positively most of the time. When he'd plan romantic evenings, I'd appreciate them. When he'd compliment me, I'd smile and say thank you. But I never reciprocated any of it. I never made him feel like I was actively choosing him, actively wanting him, actively pursuing him back. Looking back now, I can see how exhausting that must have been for him, to always be the one making the effort, always wondering if I actually wanted to be intimate or if I was just going along with it, always being the one to express desire while getting nothing back that made him feel desired in return. But at the time, I honestly thought I was being the perfect wife. I thought my role was to be receptive and grateful, not active and pursuing. I thought men didn't need to feel wanted the way women do. I thought they just naturally had confidence and didn't need that kind of validation from their partners. The first crack in my perfect little system came about a year ago when David started pulling back slightly. Nothing dramatic, nothing I could really put my finger on. He still initiated intimacy, but maybe not as frequently. He still planned romantic gestures, but they felt a little less enthusiastic. He still complimented me, but the compliments felt more automatic than genuine. When I asked him if everything was okay, he'd say he was just tired or stressed about work. And I believed him because it was easier than examining whether there might be something wrong with our dynamic. I never once considered that maybe he was tired of always being the one doing all the emotional and romantic labor in our relationship. Things continued on that way for months, David gradually becoming less enthusiastic about romance, while I remained completely oblivious to what was happening. I just figured he was going through a phase, that work stress was affecting his mood, that he'd eventually go back to being his usual romantic self. Then came the conversation that changed everything. We were having dinner one evening when David suddenly put down his fork and looked at me with this serious expression I'd never seen before. He said he'd been thinking about our relationship lately and wanted to ask me something. He wanted to know when the last time was that I'd initiated anything intimate between us. When was the last time I'd made him feel like I actually wanted him, not just accepted his desire for me? I was completely caught off guard by the question. I laughed nervously and said something about how that wasn't really my thing, that he was so much better at romance than I was. I tried to brush it off like it was just a personality difference between us. But David didn't laugh. He just sat there looking at me with this sad expression and said that sometimes he felt like he was in a relationship with someone who tolerated his affection rather than craved it. He said he couldn't remember the last time I'd made him feel genuinely wanted rather than just appreciated. That's when I got defensive. I told him that wasn't fair, that I always responded positively when he initiated things, that I never rejected his advances. I pointed out all the ways I showed love, like cooking his favorite meals and supporting his hobbies and being a good wife in general. David sighed and explained that responding to his advances wasn't the same as actively wanting him, that cooking dinner wasn't the same as showing romantic desire, that being a good wife in practical ways wasn't the same as making him feel sexually and emotionally desired by the woman he married. I still didn't get it. I told him that men are supposed to be the pursuers, that it was natural for him to initiate things, that I thought he enjoyed being in that role. I said I'd never heard of women needing to chase after their own husbands. The look that crossed David's face in that moment is something I'll never forget. It was like I'd just confirmed his worst fears about our relationship. He quietly said that he guessed he'd been hoping I might want to chase him sometimes too, that maybe after 8 years of marriage, I might have developed some desire to actively pursue him instead of just passively receiving his pursuit. We didn't fight that night. David just went quiet and distant, and I convinced myself he was being overly sensitive about the whole thing. I thought he'd get over it and things would go back to normal. I had no idea that conversation was the beginning of the end of everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Over the following weeks, David's behavior changed dramatically. He stopped initiating intimacy almost entirely. The romantic gestures disappeared, the sweet texts throughout the day stopped coming. He became polite and cordial, but all the passion and pursuit that had defined our relationship for 8 years just evaporated. At first, I was annoyed. I thought he was punishing me for not being something I'd never been expected to be. I figured he was going through some kind of midlife crisis, or letting his friends fill his head with unrealistic expectations about marriage. But as days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, I started to panic. I realized that if David wasn't going to initiate intimacy, and I didn't know how to initiate it myself, we were heading toward a completely sexless marriage. The passionate connection that had always existed between us was disappearing, and I had no idea how to get it back. I tried talking to my friends about what was happening, hoping they'd validate that David was being unreasonable, but instead of the support I expected, most of them looked at me like I was crazy. My friend Sarah asked me point blank when the last time was that I'd made David feel like I couldn't keep my hands off him. When I couldn't answer, she shook her head and said she couldn't imagine treating her husband like he was lucky just to be tolerated. Another friend, Michelle, told me about how she regularly sends her husband flirty messages during work, surprises him with lingerie, and makes sure he knows she finds him irresistible. She said the idea of never initiating anything with her partner sounded like roommate behavior, not marriage behavior. Listening to her talk about actively pursuing her own husband made me realize how foreign that concept was to me. I started paying attention to other couples around us, and I was shocked by what I saw. Women grabbing their husbands' hands, whispering something in their ear that made them smile, initiating kisses, complimenting their appearance. All these little gestures that I'd never even considered doing because I thought they weren't my responsibility. But even with this growing awareness, I still couldn't bring myself to change. The idea of initiating intimacy felt so unnatural to me, so against everything I'd been taught about femininity in relationships. I kept thinking that if I just waited long enough, David would go back to pursuing me the way he always had.
I convinced myself this was just a rough patch that would resolve itself. Meanwhile, David was becoming more and more distant. He'd come home from work, we'd have polite conversations about our days, eat dinner together, watch television, and go to bed without any physical connection whatsoever. It was like living with a courteous stranger who happened to share my last name. The breaking point came 4 months ago when I discovered David had been talking to someone at work. Her name was Elena, and she was a new marketing coordinator who joined his company 6 months earlier. I found out about their friendship when I saw her name pop up frequently in their text messages.
At first, I told myself it was just work-related communication, but something about the frequency of their texts and the way David's face would light up when he read them made me suspicious. When I finally confronted him about it, David admitted that Elena had become a close friend who he enjoyed talking to. He explained that Elena made him feel interesting and valued in conversations. She asked about his thoughts and opinions, showed genuine curiosity about his life, and made him feel like someone worth getting to know. He said talking to her reminded him what it felt like to have someone be genuinely interested in him as a person. I immediately felt threatened and demanded that he stop talking to her. But David refused. He said Alina was just a friend and that he wasn't willing to give up one of the few relationships in his life where someone actually seemed to enjoy his company. The way he said it made it clear he was talking about me, about how I'd never shown that kind of genuine interest in him. That's when I realized how deep this problem ran. It wasn't just about physical intimacy. I'd never pursued David emotionally either. I'd never been the one asking him deep questions about his thoughts and dreams. I'd never been genuinely curious about his inner world. I'd always assumed that since we lived together, I knew everything I needed to know about him. I started trying to show more interest in David's life, asking about his day with more detail, trying to engage in deeper conversations. But it felt forced and awkward because I'd never developed those habits during our 8 years together. David could tell I was making an effort, but it was clear that it felt too little, too late. The friendship with Elena continued, and I watched helplessly as David became more animated and happy when he was texting with her. He'd smile at his phone in ways I hadn't seen in months. He'd share funny stories she'd told him or interesting conversations they'd had. It was obvious that this woman was filling some emotional need in his life that I'd never even known existed. 3 months ago, David told me he wanted to separate. He said he needed space to figure out what he wanted from his life and his relationships. He explained that living with someone who seemed indifferent to his existence was slowly killing his spirit, and he couldn't continue pretending everything was fine. I begged him to try counseling, to give me a chance to change, to work on our marriage. But David said he'd been trying to communicate his needs for months and that I'd dismissed every attempt. He said he was tired of feeling like he was begging for scraps of affection from his own wife. When I asked if this was about Alina, David was quiet for a long moment. Then he admitted that talking to her had made him realize what it felt like to have someone genuinely want his attention, someone who seemed excited to hear from him, someone who made him feel desired and valued. He said it wasn't about Elena specifically, but about the realization that he deserved to be with someone who actually wanted to be with him. David moved out the following week. For the first month, I held on to hope that this was just a trial separation, that he'd realize what he was giving up and come back home. I started reading articles about how to save marriages, watching YouTube videos about rekindling romance, desperately trying to learn skills I should have developed years earlier. But last month, David made it clear that the separation was permanent. He'd filed for divorce and started openly dating Elena. Seeing them together on social media was devastating because I could see immediately what I'd never given him. Elena looked at David like he was the most fascinating man in the world. She initiated public displays of affection, posted photos of them together with captions about how lucky she felt, and generally radiated the kind of genuine desire and enthusiasm that I'd never shown him. Looking at their relationship now, I can see everything I never gave David reflected back at me through another woman. Elena doesn't wait for David to text first. She doesn't assume he'll always be the one planning dates or initiating physical contact. She treats his desire for her like some kind of favor she's granting him by accepting it. In the photos they post together, Elena's body language tells a completely different story than mine ever did. She leans into him, touches his arm while they're talking, looks at him with obvious attraction and interest. When David posts something on social media, she's the first to comment with genuine enthusiasm about whatever he shared. She celebrates his achievements, supports his interests, and makes it clear to everyone that she thinks he's incredible. Watching this from the outside has been like getting a masterclass in everything I failed to do for 8 years. Elena initiates conversations about things David cares about. She suggests activities they could do together. She compliments his appearance, his intelligence, his sense of humor. She makes it obvious that she finds him attractive and that being with him makes her happy. The most painful realization is that none of this requires some special talent I don't possess. Elena isn't doing anything extraordinary. She's just actively participating in her relationship instead of passively receiving whatever attention comes her way. She's choosing David every day instead of just allowing herself to be chosen by him. I've started thinking about all the missed opportunities over the years. All the times David came home excited about something that happened at work, and I half listened while scrolling through my phone. All the times he suggested we try something new together, and I agreed without real enthusiasm. All the mornings he left for work without me telling him he looked handsome or that I'd miss him during the day. I remember one particular evening about 2 years ago when David had bought a new shirt for a work presentation. He came out of the bedroom asking if I thought it looked good on him, and I glanced up from my laptop just long enough to say it was fine. I went right back to what I was doing without really seeing him, without telling him he looked confident and attractive, without showing any interest in this thing that was clearly important to him. Now I imagine Elena in that same situation. I picture her putting down whatever she was doing, really looking at David, telling him how great he looks, maybe even being playful about how good he looks in that shirt, making him feel seen and appreciated and desired instead of just briefly acknowledged. The worst part is that I convinced myself for so long that my passive approach was actually a good thing. I thought I was being low maintenance, easy to please, not demanding too much from David. I genuinely believed I was being the ideal wife by never asking for more than what he was already giving me. The truth is, I lost David because I never learned that love is something you actively give, not just passively receive. I spent 8 years treating marriage like I was the prize, instead of realizing we were both supposed to be choosing each other every single day. Elena didn't steal my husband. She just gave him what I never thought he needed. And now I'm sitting here alone, finally understanding that being pursued means nothing if you never pursue back.